welcome back. Today we're going to take a moment to contemplate the power of our childhoods and that of our children's childhoods. You know, I often say that we spend our entire lives uncovering and undoing the first 7 years of our life. Now, before you go off drowning in your guilt that you've completely ruined your kids' lives, hold on, there's hope. While it's true that those early years are some of the most important, it is also reassuring for you to know that children, they are some special type of resilient. They are extremely gritty, and through the right conscious realignments, we can help our kids recover. But yes, it's undeniably true that those early years are so important. And this is why we're doing this parenting quest, so that those of you who are still young parents or haven't had children yet, you can learn from the unconsciousness of those like me who are older than you. You see, children, they're like sponges. They absorb our fears, our anxieties, our worries, our joys. They literally soak up our entire ways of being. And if these are unconscious ways, well, then yes, they're going to soak up the unconscious ways of being as well. You know, the ways we look in the mirror and we frown at our wrinkles or at our cellulite, the way we rush from pillar to post, anxious and nervous, the way we get upset if we don't get invited to a party or if a friend is rude to us, even the ways we rush in traffic, the ways we eat our food. Our children, they are noticing all of it. They are watching us all the time. Most of all, they notice how we feel, how we react, how we fear, how we anger, worry, laugh. Our children absorb our emotional energy. It's like an emotional blueprint that they're absorbing at all times, almost to the point of replacing their own with ours. They kind of like fuse with our emotional energy. And this fusion, if we're not careful or conscious, it can result in a loss of their own true sense of self. Every child, they wish to be seen, to be validated, and unconditionally accepted by their parents. But in order to get this validation, this sense of worth from its parents, the child sometimes has to give up its own authentic sense of self. And the child will do almost anything for this. It will contort and pretzel itself in order to get its inner needs met by its parents. It will abscond its true self. I think most of us did this when we were growing up. We created this entire false, fake persona in order to feel validated, sometimes by our parents or by our peer group or by culture. You know, the more the parent fails to realize the child for its essence, the greater will be the split between the child's true self and the child's false self. You know, the more the conditions that the parent puts on the child to deem it worthy, the more the child will need to create that false reality for itself. And so it'll create this mask, the single and most pivotal question of who am I truly never gets answered. And instead, we blindly follow our parents' or culture's ways of being and never truly get a chance, an opportunity to connect to who it is we truly are. So now, how does it relate to us as parents? Well, in every possible way. Whether we like it or not, it is an undeniable fact that we parent our children in the manner that we were parented and cultured. We raise them in the ways we were and in the manners that we were. And if we were robbed of the discovery of our authentic self, so it is that we rob our children of theirs. And this kind of cyclical abduction of authentic spirit, parent to child, parent to child, parent to child, continues over generations. You know, when I began on my own personal awakening, I began to have feelings about my own parents. I began to remember, thinking, wondering, or why did they stifle me or stop me or make me create a false sense of self? Why did they make me lie to myself? And quite naturally, I began to have resentment or frustrations towards them. Maybe it'll bring up some similar stuff within you that lies unresolved with your own parents. Maybe it'll remind you of the difficult relationship you currently have with them. Maybe it'll bring into mind all the old wounds from your own childhood. If this is happening to you, trust me, this is natural. In fact, part of the awakening process is to release our own parents of our expectations. As we do this work, we begin to realize that they too, like us, were raised unconsciously by their own parents. And they too were carrying wounds within them that were hard for them to heal. And as we have compassion for ourselves, we release them from the expectations we hold. And we stop looking at them as parents per se in that role, but now we begin to understand and see them more as our spiritual companions, walking this path of life together. As our own spiritual connection to our own essence deepens, then quite naturally we begin to have compassion not only for ourselves, but for all beings, especially our parents. We begin to honor and understand that their lack of connection to their own essence allowed them to disconnect to us. We begin to understand how their own wounds from their own generations past began causing a disconnect with us. And with respect and with great freedom and honor, we liberate ourselves from our dependency on our parents. We free ourselves now from the desire that they should be different. You know, many traditional therapies will say, go back to your parents and confront them and make sure they understood what pain they inflicted. In conscious parenting, we begin to understand that they had no choice. Just like when we look back on our own parenting, we see that we had no choice. We were doing things the best we could to the level of consciousness we had. So it is with our parents, that they in fact were trying their best. They just didn't have the consciousness that we needed of them. Our parents, just like we in our past, we need to be freed from the burden of shame and guilt, from the expectations. Our parents need to be free now to step into a new identity, if we allow it, that of our spiritual partners. You know, when we begin to see our parents as our spiritual partners, then we end our toxic dysfunctionality with them, and we begin to carve a new relationship of humility and respect with them. You know, I often say that we are living patterns, not lives. Now, why do I say this? Because patterns, they abound. They are everywhere. Unless we awaken, we are bound to repeat patterns from our past. We have no choice but to. It is only through a blinding and persistent awareness that we can begin to notice how we have been repeating patterns all our lives, patterns from our childhood. And only then, once we become aware, can we stop unconsciously passing on this emotional baggage from the past onto our children. Now, in order for us to start becoming aware of our patterns, we will need to revisit the first relationships of our lives. There's no escaping this step. We must excavate the past, because it is only when we understand the past patterns from our own childhood that we can fully see how these past patterns are influencing our current ways of being. So now, as we begin this path of understanding our patterns, it's important that you begin to start to recall those memories and moments from your childhood. In particular, how did they teach you about things like success or achievement, about happiness, about joy, about love? How were feelings even expressed at home? How did your parents or earliest caregivers process pain? When we become aware of how we were raised and patterned and conditioned, this will allow us to become more aware of how these patterns are literally right now in the present moment interfering in our relationship with our children. You know, little do we realize that the ways our parents process their feelings and live their lives, how they loved, feared, cried, laughed, all of it is now deeply ingrained inside our own being. It's impacting us developmentally, behaviorally, emotionally, every moment of our own parenting. It has literally shaped our souls. And if we don't become consciously aware of just how this blueprinting was created, then we're just going to unconsciously regurgitate all this past stuff onto our children. So for today's task, we're going to excavate, archaeologically dig into our past patterns. So this is a little bit of a complex task, so give yourself some time because it may take a little longer to complete. So we're going to begin by starting to recall some of your early memories of childhood. I would really like you to reflect on each of your parents or your earliest caregivers. It could be an aunt or a grandmother. And I want you to write down your thoughts. This is what I want you to do. Describe him or her individually with 3 adjectives for their strengths and 3 adjectives for their weaknesses. Now, once you've done that, I want you to reflect on the actual relationship that you shared with mom and with dad. And I would like you to rate it on a scale from 1 to 10. 1 being the lowest or the most disconnected, and 10 being the highest connection. I want you to rate it on the basis of your level of closeness with them, your level of connection with them, your level of honesty, transparency. How much of you can show up in your relationship with them? Do you feel comfortable to tell them your deepest truths? Or do you feel like you have to put up a persona or a mask or a fake personality around them? This is how you can rate your relationship with them. And then as we go deeper in this exercise, I want you to go to your feelings and your pain, and I want you to recall and examine, were your feelings and pain allowed to be felt in your household? And if the answer is no, then what did you do with your feelings? How did people process feelings and pain? How was suffering dealt with? Was it suppressed? Was it expressed? Were there addictions? So I want you to reflect on this because it's very important to understand the patterns of how feelings were dealt with. And then perhaps you could take a moment to reflect on how love was expressed. What were the messages around life? You know, all of us imprinted from our parents a message around life. Was life abundant or was life scarce? You know, many of us parents tell our children, life is suffering. What kind of message did you receive? Was life too risky? Was life to be avoided? Was life something that was benevolent and good? It's very important that you identify the pattern message you got around life because this is what you're passing on to your children. So take some time to reflect on these past patterns. Try to be completely honest with yourself because when you begin to understand how your past has influenced your present, now guess what? You have the power to choose. You can choose what you want to pass on to your children. You see, this is what conscious awakening is about. It's about having choices. So you're no longer just simply a robotic regurgitator of your past, but instead you're this enlivened choice maker. And that's what we're going to do in this quest. We're going to create new choices for you so that you can consciously respond to your child versus just unconsciously react to them.